Hi guys, it's Blackie. Okay, today I'm going to answer a couple of questions I've been getting about the wood stove and about putting a stove inside of a tent, etc. So there's a little bit of understanding you need to understand materials, draft, vent, all of the above. So let's start a little early and let's look about when we decided to put a fire inside of a building, which is, you'd think, is ancient, but is not as old as you'd think. We're going to start in Europe, back during the Dark Ages and stuff, after the Roman collapse and etc. And one of the common ways of building a house, and houses and buildings and communal things, was in these halls, they were called. Okay? You had a fire in the center of it that went up, and then on either eave of the building was an opening for the smoke to go up and flow out of the building. Now, as you can imagine, that was a pretty smoky building. And we know this by looking at the archaeological remains of the bones and the teeth and everything else, how much smoke these people were ingesting being in those things during the winter. So it was not a great idea. It also meant you could only have a one-story building, because if you went and put another one up here, the smoke just went up there. It didn't work out. And so then somebody got an idea, probably somebody rich with more money than time, the idea of putting a second story on. And so what they did was, they still had the fire in the center bottom. They went up here and they built a second story, but in the middle of that second story, they put a shaft going outside, so the smoke went up the center shaft. This was the birth of the big innovation, a chimney. Okay, and these buildings weren't particularly well sealed up, and that's the reason they deforested most of northern Europe and Scotland and everything else during the medieval ice ages, because they had to just burn everything trying to stay warm in those cold conditions. Okay, now Benjamin Franklin was the one that realized that a stove, he didn't want to invent it, but he did create a stove, and that stove was called the Franklin stove. And it had a design trying to work better. Now, Gingy, don't knock down the thing. Gingy says hello. Okay, now go find a chipmunk. What Franklin's stove did was this. Franklin's stove was, he put it up on legs. It had a top, a plate to come out, and then it had a door. You had a controllable air, you had a grate in here, and then back here, either on the back or the top of it, you had a chimney, a stovepipe coming up. This allowed you to put pots, that type thing, up on top of it, and in here you would have your fire. Now, the basic concept of it is this. The combustion of the wood generates heat. That's what we want. It also generates the smoke and the gases that we don't want. Air is flowing in here, coming into it, being consumed, and then heat, which must rise, is going up and finding the escape route, which is the chimney going out. This flow in, flow through, flow out is a continuous thing. Think of it like water. That you have to have water flowing in for it to be flowing out the other end. If you reduce how much air is coming in, the fire gets dampened down and it's less smoke going up. If you put a dampener in here, where I can reduce this to slow this down and force this to build up a little bit, where it's got plenty of air coming in, it's having to fight to get out, holds the heat a little bit better. That's the basic concept of it. Okay? Now, let's put it inside of a tent. Okay? Now, where my experience is a wall tent. Okay? So you have ground level, you have the back of the wall tent, you have the top of the wall tent, you have the front of the wall tent, and then at some point in here you have the stovepipe coming, which runs through to the back of the stove. Like this, just like Franklin's old stove sitting there with the door right there. Okay, a canvas tent is of course not airtight. Air can actually to some minor degree flow through even waterproof canvas, okay, to a minor degree. But the doors up here on the end do not have a connection, they just have ties. So the doors do like this and then tie points, kind of like you don't have a zipper on a coat, you just have a couple of buttons, okay? One flap goes over the other one, and they are interchangeable in either way, so if the wind is coming from that way going this way, you don't want this because the wind will scoop in. You reverse it so that the wind goes across, see what I'm saying? So there is going to be air leakage along the bottom and around all the doors. This is important, because just like water, once you've initiated that fire in that box, it's basically like an engine or a heat pump or an air pump or anything you want to call it. It's expanding the gas of being burned, and that is causing the positive flow out as smoke and air coming in from the whole area into this thing to go out. Now, what happens if you take a little tea candle, you sit it on a saucer with just a little bit of water around it, and you take an upside down drinking glass and put it over the top of that candle? It goes out in just a second or two, don't it? Because it consumes all the oxygen. Fire is a massive consumer of oxygen, and it greatly requires that. So in a canvas tent like this, it is not a big deal, because air is leaking at both doors and along the bottom edge all the way in. So it's fantastic for that, for doing this type of job. But what if it's not a canvas tent? What if instead of it, it's that OneWind, which has a belled door and a belled door and coming across the bottom. Now, it's loose all the way across the bottom, but it zips up on both doors up until about 2 inches from the top. So you do get a little positive airflow in that way. The bottom edge, as long as it's just sitting there, is okay. But this material has a heavy fireproof coating on it. No air is going through that. Now, what would happen if I got into a great big garbage bag and I gathered up and I held the opening dead closed? Just like that candle, I'll die because there ain't no air coming in, right? We have to have positive airflow. And with the two little bitty openings and supposedly leaking around the bottom all the way, you'd be fine. But what happens if you pile a lot of leaves and bury the edge all the way around? Will it seal up too well? Have they done too good a job? That's the question. That was my concern. Because I know that this material is not permeable. It is not going to allow air in. So once I seal it up, how sealed is it? A good fire inside that firebox could consume all that oxygen in a short amount of time if it ain't enough leaking in. See? So the smart move is to leave the door unzipped just a little bit, let a little bit. Remember how them flaps were on the old canvas tent? Leave it unzipped just a little bit, because you're going to have your hammock strap coming in, and you're supposed to zip up, and then you'll have your hammock in the middle of it, in there. And I'm believing it's doable. But I want you to fully understand here, what if you're in the kind of conditions like my good friend Chris Hall is up in Michigan? You're in snow. What if this bottom edge down here freezes to the ground. Because remember, heat rises. And so what if down there at ground level, it's cool enough that it freezes and it seals up that bottom edge? Well, you're sealed up and you're sealed up. All you'd have is two 2-inch air holes. Is that enough air? If you're inside of a garbage bag, like I said, completely sealed up, and all you got is a drinking straw to breathe through, is that enough air? Yeah, you know, it comes down to a common sense. Air on the side of enough air, okay? My plan is, when I set this up, to keep wind from flowing underneath. If this side is the dominant wind, I mean, this is where the wind's coming from, north wind, let's say, I will pile up and bury this edge with leaves. But I will leave the door ends unburied, and I will leave the far side probably unburied. Definitely leave the doors to guarantee I got a little bit of air coming under. Okay? What are some signs that things could be bad? One, we've already talked about, I've established that my stove seals up. Any kind of, there will be a little light haze of smoke in there, you just can't help it. But you also want to make sure that you have a flow going toward it. So what I did was I got into my tent and turned on a really strong flashlight. And you could see the direction of smoke, and the smoke was flowing toward the stove. Any smoke in here, any little haze, it's like a fog, a real fine fog. You don't notice it so much, more of you just smell a little bit of smoke, but you don't really, you know, it's not heavy smoke. But there's always going to be a little bit of smoke. It should be anything that's being circulated around, there needs to be an air circulation. So you need to be aware of it. So don't seal this thing up too blood tight. Because if you did, if you managed to seal up that hole, go across both doors, zip it up tight, and it's frozen to the ground, you'll probably consume all that oxygen in that room in 5 minutes or less with that fire going. And then you're going to hit the ground. Because if you don't realize it and you get outside, you suffocate. I'm not saying this is a flaw of the tent, in no way. But it's just common sense of, you wouldn't seal up that type in a trash bag, would you? So this material don't breathe. So we got to make sure we got plenty of airflow. Now somebody else asked me, hey, could I put this into my camper shell in the back of my pickup? I wouldn't recommend it. Could it be done? Yeah, you'd have to leave a window open, again, for airflow. But any kind of vehicle or stuff like that that's sealed up well, don't get enough air. And it's fine when we're in the car and everything's sealed. They're still designed to leak a little air, but a fire consumes so much. So even putting something like a buddy heater in the back of a pickup truck can be iffy because of fumes, exhaust, etc. So it's just not a wise idea. And that's the reason you don't see RVs with fireplaces. I mean, look at these luxury RVs that's got everything. I have seen a $500,000 RV that had a fireplace in it. And it had air vents and air detectors that when the fireplace lit and the heat went above a certain degree, it opened up them vents automatically to bring fresh air directly into the fireplace. And it had a glass door to seal up the fireplace. So you could see the little fire, and you could put little sticks in and close the door and sit there in the air conditioning and enjoy your wine. Rich guys, you know. But the thing is, if you're going to put a wood stove into a small cabin that you've built, make sure you have an airflow. Now let's talk about cabins, small structures, and things like that. Okay. Let's say we have a small cabin, something that you've built or whatever, and you put a wood stove into it. You've got doors, windows, and etc. It is the best idea to right here at the fireplace or at the wood stove to have some sort of air vent right there underneath it, bringing air to it. Now, my good friend Dan Lutz, he had a wood pellet stove in his house. And he told me about how when he had put that stove in, it would warm the house, but it never got really warm. And it just didn't seem to warm the house until he talked to somebody and said, you know, you're supposed to put a separate air hose, an air vent for that. So he took some 3-inch diameter pipe and put an outside air vent. And instantly the place got warmer. Why? Well, the house is sealed up real tight. And that fire has to have oxygen. It has to have air. So just like you opened up a hole in the side of your above ground swimming pool and the water's wanting to flow out, that air is being sucked through that fireplace and going out that chimney. If all all the doors and windows and everything are sealed up tight, it's kind of like sucking through a straw. So it dampens down the fire greatly because it can't get enough oxygen. And it forces air to be sucked in around all the doors and all the windows, every electrical panel, every connection, every water pipe, everything coming in your house. So your whole house leaks like a sieve as it's trying to suck that air in. See? But by putting an air supply directly to that stove right there at it, just a 3-inch diameter thing coming in, it stopped that, because now it stops sucking air from the rest of the house. It's got an air supply. This air is flowing up, going into the stove and flowing out, and the heat is now radiating out into the house without sucking wind around every door, every panel, every pipe, everything else. The house was infinitely warmer, and his consumption of fuel went down significantly because he's not having to burn nearly as much fuel trying to generate the heat, because the cold air was coming into all these rooms, keeping the temperature down. By doing it, the air becomes positive now. So now the heat coming out is actually kind of positive pressurizing the house to a degree. And you're talking about like a ½ pound, but that means air is going out now. All the windows, all those doors that you've got well sealed up. And so you're not getting that cold outside air flowing in. You've got warm air trying to flow outward because it's expanding. Warm air is expanding air. And so it's trying to push out from the house. And so your house is a lot warmer. So if you've got a cabin and you're wanting to put a small wood stove in it, put a dedicated air to the outside close by. Something I could open and close at will, you know. So when I fire up the fireplace, I open it up, just like the dampener on the wood stove. I'm not sure, but I think what Dan did is he just put a dryer connection. He went and got like one of the small dryer connections that goes like into a mobile home and put that coming in from that side. So outside you had a flap and a downturn. So it ain't just a hole going at your house. And that way it would pull air in slowly around it, and that would flow right to the stove and heat everything up. Having a fire inside a structure is an ancient idea. But for the vast majority of the time that we've done this, a couple of thousand years, was not a good idea the way we did it. We today understand what carbon monoxide is. Today we understand the dangers of breathing smoke a lot. We understand all these other things that we didn't know back in those days. So anytime you're putting a wood stove or a buddy heater or something into a small space, you need to be aware of this. You need to think about this and how it's going to affect. Now, what are the signs things are going wrong? Usually, if you've got an exhaust problem of some kind, like carbon monoxide or something like that, usually you feel it up here in the top of your sinuses a little bit. Your sinuses feel like you got a dry, you know, like a sinus infection starting, and you get a headache pretty quickly. That's a dead giveaway that you're breathing carbon monoxide. Not good. You know, it's not one of them things you die. It takes a couple of minutes, but it don't take long. What's the other effect of it? You get sleepy because carbon monoxide is replacing oxygen. And as you start getting oxygen deprivation into the brain, you get sleepy. And so you go to sleep. And then you're probably not going to wake up. It can cause all kinds of damage. Now, with this One Wind wall tent I've got. Using common sense, not to seal it up blood tight at the bottom, so I do have airflow. Keep my fire reasonable inside of it, and with just a few bits of knowledge, I'm totally safe with it, and so will you be. At the same time, putting a wood stove into a small cabin, a structure, or something like that you're doing, you can be totally safe with it as long as you understand this simple concept that the fire is breathing. It's sucking the oxygen out of the air. So I need to provide it with a source of fresh oxygen. If it's just a low little bit of air coming in where I got all the heat, but it isn't wind coming through, and I'm not like Dan's house where I got a fire going, but dang, I'm cold. Too much of a draft. If I would provide air directly to it, I would probably be better. Thus, like I talked about, taking a piece of that stovepipe and putting it underneath the wall of the tent, right underneath the stove. That way it's got fresh air coming to that stove, and it doesn't need all this other air so much. It leaves more air for me. And those gaps at the top of the tent and leaking around the doors should make it nice and comfortable and toasty in there. I just wanted to do this video, guys, because I've had so many people asking about this, and I've had one guy, well, several people have talked about sealing it up even tighter. Could I seal it up even tighter? How about if I buried the bottom edge, because I don't want cold wind coming underneath. If I bury the bottom edge in snow all the way around, you know, wouldn't that make it seal up better and hold the heat better? Yeah. But remember, heat rises, so the top of the tent is going to be the warmest, the bottom is going to be the coolest. So you could freeze to the ground in such cold conditions and seal it up too much. That's one thing you got to be aware of. If I start feeling any kind of headache, I'm going to crack a zipper, get some air. You know, that's the thing. I'm not going to sleep with this thing with a fire going in it. What I'll do is I will fire it up, I'll warm up the tent, which warms up my blanket and everything else. And then I will eat, do whatever, and when it's time to go to bed, I'll let the fire go out. I'll sling up my hammock. I will let it warm up everything, so all my blankets, all my covers, everything is good, and I'll let the fire go out. I'll get up in my hammock, seal up all the air on it, let it smother the stove down, and I'll go to bed. In the morning when I wake up, laying there at the edge, I will have ready to go the wood I'm going to put back in it and my fire starter to put in, hit it with a lighter, fire it up, close the door, crack it, go get back in my nice warm bed and wait for the tent to warm up. That's my plan. But when we do the overnight, which is coming up, I'll show you this. Hope you've enjoyed this video, guys. Please leave any questions or comments below, and I'll be happy to get back with you as quick as I can. Till next time, guys, I'm Blackie wishing you safe journeys. Have a great day, guys.